Hey, fellow G&Ters, those of us like our spirituality with a twist. As you can see, we're joined again this week by our anthropologist on call or on retainer. I don't know which one you prefer, Daniel. You I maybe you like retainer better. I can't remember.
Yeah, he's on retainer for sure.
I like him on call because I call him. But Ryan Davenport, thanks so much for coming back, Ryan, to chat some more with us. Uh,
Sure, absolutely.
we've been doing things on cults. And again, we got this series we're working on. And as we've been saying every episode, this is sort of our way of responding to what's happening in the world around us. We were talking a little bit off mic, and I wanted to give credit to you, Daniel, and I'll do it in maybe every episode going forward because you really hit on this way of talking about things that are happening now to frame it more within this kind of notion of the psychology of cultness and how it's sort of taking things over. And that's been our slant. So, anyways, we got to this like in the episodes we're doing, we started talking about conformity from the social psych point of view, but then also like what does it mean when people start to dissent? So we had sort of a big conversation about that last week. And I got a couple of things I wanted to share a little bit further about this. And Ryan and Daniel were really nice. Thank you too for being willing to talk about these other sort of issues around this for maybe a short but sweet episode on the meaning of dissent. So, all right. I think what I got going on is just a couple others, like one study in particular that was like really striking. Cool if I share it now with y'all?
Go right ahead.
Sounds
Do
good.
it.
Okay. This one I think really kind of
But
like,
before you do that, Eric, make
Mhm.
sure if you
Oh
enjoy
yeah.
our material, subscribe and share our work. It definitely helps out, in the algorithm and whatnot. It costs absolutely nothing. We are, funded by ourselves. We do our research. We try to present materials that we think are useful. And, as we're diving on this series of social psychology, the more people that we can reach, the more that we can kind of help break whatever spell that we believe that people are in. Even ourselves are in a spell. So hopefully we'll break out of this too, and we'll just be totally free and not even embodied anymore. But until then, uh,
Ultimate spell of like non-corporeality. That's the
that's
goal.
right. That's right. Until then, hit the subscribe button. It definitely helps out. Anyways, thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so I wanted to share, one thing on the power of this, what happens when people dissent, just from one of these classic social psych things we didn't get to last week when we were recording. And then also a little bit about the consequences of this, which are pretty interesting too. And then we can maybe pull it back to we each have our own spiritual perspectives and we'll tie it all together in one neat bow at the end. It'll be beautiful. All right. So the big study here, we looked at these things where you sort of people get pressured into giving wrong answers to questions just because of the pressure of like the social conformity idea in the social psych world. And there's some pretty interesting studies that involve just people misidentifying colors. So you show someone a color and it's obviously red, and you get other people in the group who are Confederates, they would say, people who are conspiring as part of the study, part of the project, to say that the red thing is orange, and you see whether or not people will go along with that. And it's like really interesting, the human response to this once you start introducing this thing of dissent. Okay, so if you have no pressure at all, you just got somebody just answering, is that red or orange? Of course, people get it right like all the time. Like the number of wrong answers is like 0.85% or something, whatever you would misidentify that, I don't know, but nothing happens there. So that's one of the things, right? So with no pressure at all. If you put people in a group in this study and you get other people kind of conspiring to give the wrong answer, in a weird way, kind of amazing in this one, the number shoots up to 70% of people will give the wrong answer just under the pressure of it. I don't know how that fits into your kind of 33%, Daniel, that you've been talking about. Maybe there's 30% of the people that resist. You sort of like that number, right?
That magic third from
Yeah, that magic third idea. Yeah.
Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point.
So you still get people who will resist, right? But in
Yeah.
this one, 70% of the people are willing just to fold and call, orange red or red orange or something like that. But the weird thing that happens is if you show people consent ahead of time, even in another study, so they're doing like two different groups, right? And they go into a previous group where someone's just going to disagree, right? And they're going to like refuse to go along with this sort of conformity of misidentifying. So maybe in that one, as opposed to the red and the orange, you're so blue, and people are misidentifying it as green. But if you get a dissenter there, right, then all of a sudden people start to flip. And it's kind of interesting because we were talking about what kind of dissent do you need to sort of break people out of things. And we kind of said, you want it to be consistent and you want it to seem objective. And there were all these sort of criteria around this. We talked about a lot last episode, but that was sort of part of it from the social psych point of view. So if you show like inconsistent consent to people, well, they'll do a little bit better. They'll go to the Daniel's 33 number, right? Even if there's just they've seen before in a previous study, and now you pop them into the new one, and everyone is ganged up against them, giving the wrong answers. They'll still disagree because they've seen dissent previously, is the way this is talked about. And so they'll start disagreeing at more like a 33% rate. But getting to this idea of, consistent dissent, where they've already been exposed to somebody who's like, no, I'm not fucking going along with this at all. If you have someone who sort of sometimes agrees and sometimes doesn't, you get 33% once the person gets into the new group. But if you have someone in the previous group who's just like, no, I'm going to consistently give the right answer, then everything flips. And the number of people who are willing to give the wrong answer flops down to 14%. So the numbers get really interesting. The more like you have people being exposed to dissent, they'll start to dissent themselves. And especially if that dissent is like consistent and there's follow through on it, then it really is kind of spell breaking. I don't know what that means for our culture now, but I'm kind of hoping like even if everybody is out there, us in our way with our podcast and then other people doing their own things too, eventually it becomes a thing that will start to snap people out of stuff. And you all got any reactions to it, just out of curiosity?
I had a question actually. No, when you looked at the study, was there a conclusion on why did they have like a hypothesis or like a discussion on sort of what the researchers thought the reason for these people who were agreeing with the wrong answer was for? Did they discuss that at all, or they just said this is the results?
Well, they were kind of talking about if you're purposely, if you're disagree, if you're giving the wrong answer because of social pressure, you're doing that because of conformity.
Okay, all right.
You
So
know,
that's the conformity piece, and then you have this small group that dissented, and then once they dissented, then they continued to they basically continued this mistrust, right? And going in the future, and they'd be more critical. They can't this
well, I
critical
think that
mindset
the idea was that
continued.
they were exposed to someone else who was also conspiring in the study to
Yeah.
give the correct answer, not the wrong one. And it sort of like snaps the spell.
Okay, for the rest of the group.
Well, there's only one person who's the
Yeah.
subject in the experiment.
Okay. Okay. So, but
Everybody
then,
else is part of the scheme. You know what I mean?
yeah. But then, didn't you say also part of it was like then in the future, like it had an effect on them going forward,
Yeah. In future groups, they would like continue to resist, like it
like
carried over.
they would resist correctly, not
Yes.
just for their sake. Okay,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
that's intriguing, right? So there's this action of dissent, which seems to like cause a degree of clarity and critical thinking going on in the future, right?
Yeah.
As you said, it breaks the spell.
Yeah. And it doesn't like it's just,
Yeah,
just the experience around people who are willing to like go, no,
yeah,
I'm not going to give the wrong answer. Again, it's still a setup. I mean, it's one of the people in the group. They're all answering
yeah,
wrong, and the other person's going to answer right.
yeah.
And like, I think the other little detail or nuance is if that person who's, again, part of the experiment, but if they just keep answering right and answering right, it really seems to crack things. And even when that person is gone, they're not, the person who was answering right is part of the setup, right? You take that same subject in the experiment. Now they're in a new group, they're running solo. Everyone's answering wrong. They'll still go, no, I'm going to answer right.
Yeah.
So it seems to carry over into new situations. This is something Daniel and I had talked about before when we were looking at that study from the Turkish social scientists, where people get a little bit reconditioned almost, right?
Yeah.
But if you get people that like, okay, we're not going to go along with this, even when that support is there, the dissenter is gone and they're on their own, they still will resist the group.
I don't want to sidetrack this conversation, but just made me think of sort of, I think a lot of people think they're dissenting and are actually going along with it. Like they think they're being like, edgy, right? I'm being edgy and I'm going to vote for this crazy bastard, right? And, but they're not actually dissenting, right? They're going along with whatever their friends or so they're saying, but they feel edgy. That's not actually true dissent because it's not there's no critical thought involved.
Yeah, I guess in these studies they're trying to get to like, what would you call them? Archetypal, simple situations of dissent or something,
Yeah.
right? Just to test the thing. But I don't disagree with you. I think it's true. I can remember even thinking that as a teenager.
Yeah.
Some of the people that who are like, I don't know, dressing like they're a roadie for the Cure or something like that. If we go back Gen Xy, whatever that would be for other generations. Ryan and I are both Gen X. Daniel's like shaking his head, like, what the fuck is this? But you just be like, well, you know, you're just a poser.
Right. Right.
You're not really dissenting. So yeah,
Yeah,
but
that's a
this is
very
like
Gen X term, right? I think the poser, right? That's a very Gen X thing. I don't think
Daniel is
millennials.
also nodding along.
Yeah.
You can still say poser now, maybe. But you know, we're not all hip on the Gen Z slang anyways, though. I hear it from my son, but we're not using it. We're
Fair
not saying
enough.
play. Um, uh, anyways, I think it just says something about the power of it. So I just wanted to share it because the stats are really striking, right? The person can obviously do the thing. They're going to do it like 99% of the time, they're going to do it right. If you pressure them, they'll crack at
Yeah.
like, something like a 70% rate. If you show them inconsistent dissent beforehand, well, okay, they do a little bit better. The number goes to 33, and all of a sudden you get people them being exposed to someone going, no, I'm not going to go along with this. Then it really crashes out. So maybe, I don't know. We were talking earlier, Ryan, before we were doing the podcast, just about are we optimistic or pessimistic about the world? And maybe this has a little flavor of optimism. You know what I mean? As long as you have people who are willing to say no, it can inspire other people to say no.
It's interesting. I just think about, also this group of people. I can't remember if we talked about this in the last podcast, but you do have this subgroup of people who like are just sort of let's burn it all down, right? Like
Yeah.
they're like I'm gonna vote for this person or agree with this person because even though I think they're actually going to be bad for society, but I just want to burn it all down, right? Which is you could argue that that is a means of dissent, right? But is it a dissent meant for critical thought? Like I think that's an important distinction is how many people are actually dissenting with reason, or are they just going along with another cult-like mentality, another group?
I mean, I'm going under the theory, and then what you think, Daniel, I'm going under the theory that's just like that's a little doomsday cultish to me. Or at least that's the position I'm taking for the purpose of these episodes, right? I'm trying to frame it in like, okay, if our position in this is that the main problem is whether you call it a tendency or a vulnerability, we kind of discussed this in the episodes coming up to this, but whatever term you use, that's the point of like problem. And then, to the extent that someone's doing what you're talking about, Ryan, to me, that kind of reads like culty and then even like doomsday culty.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is that how you think about it too, Daniel? Or
Well,
what
you
do you,
you have kind of like two different threads running at once. One is can you if you ask yourself, are you the kind of person that can be convinced to do something that you know is not right? And that's a personal question. That you're going to, and then you have to look back at your life and say, when has that happened before? Has that happened before? Because part of that is determining what is quote unquote right or not right. You know what I'm saying? So that's first. And usually, if you're willing to put yourself in harm's way for the benefit of somebody else, then my guess is that you are not going to be pressured to do something that is not right, regardless of situation. This is my personal feeling.
what do you think, Daniel? You think that's like a learned skill though? I mean, that's kind of
I
an interesting
mean,
social psych question too. And I don't know if it really answered that per se,
I don't
but it's
know.
almost like in this thing, kind of like a learned skill. You saw someone else do it in this controlled way. Okay, now I'm going to do it in the next one. I'm going to dissent because I saw someone else do it.
Hmm.
So maybe
Hmm.
it's something I mean, we have to hope that it's something you can learn, right?
Yeah, I mean, learning is always a possibility, right?
I
You
mean,
know what
this
I
is the
mean?
implication of maybe a study like this. People can't
Sure.
learn to do it, right?
Yeah.
And it might be a learned skill.
I think then on the other part, in terms of the doomsday, cult identity, like I've heard those arguments made from both sides of the aisle. I've definitely heard like super liberal people be like, maybe we just burn it down and start all over again. I was like, they're like, what's funny? I said, you think you're going to survive? You think your soft ass is going to survive when power goes out? That's interesting. That's cool. I'm glad you have such high hopes for yourself. Can you hunt? Oh, you don't even know how to handle a weapon. Can you gut an animal? Do you know how to make a fire? Like, how are you going to filter your water? I know these are just basic stupid things from a dumb bro, but like that's what we're talking about.
Well,
And
you were kind of interesting about that when you were talking about Iraq too, though, just to like flashback to other episodes, because you saw a society like fall apart,
yeah, I mean
chaos of it.
being in Iraq, when I was there in 2000, what, 4, 2003, 2004. It's just their society had stopped progressing in the early 90s after the first Iraq war, after the first, invade, yeah, they had the first war with Iraq, or in Kuwait and everything else. Like they had stopped building. There was freeways that were just, you could tell they've been there for years, just stopped. You know what I
Mm.
mean? Buildings half built. It's great. And it's not, they weren't destroyed. They were just not built. They just, the progress in that culture or in that society just stopped. And so you see it live, in person, and it just changes the way that you view the possibility of society. I mean, I know everybody complains about potholes, but usually someone's going to come out and fix them. Not always, but at some point, you know what I'm saying? But what if that never happened ever? And all the streets were just totally tore up and what like it's just the way in which people live in other places gives you that's why traveling is really important if you can afford it, or make it happen in your life. It gives you a different perspective. And so then when people say, "Well, we have to, burn it all down and start over again," it's like, well, go to some other place that hasn't even been built up to the begin with. Now, can we say that our society is better than others because it has more amenities? No, I don't think so. But I'm just saying in terms of possibilities of sanitation and healthcare, you know what I mean? Basic kind of like what we would consider normal. Other people don't have them in other parts of the world. And I mean, hell, there's leprosy in Thailand right now. Right now, there are lepers out there currently. You know what I'm saying? So we're not that far away from like being in a different place. So there's just so many like of these kind of mentalities of like, oh yeah, we'll just do this or we'll just do that. And it's like, who's we? And what is the cost of those decisions in the long run on other people's lives? Because what society? It's a collection of individuals. So yeah, it's just yeah, stupid.
We were talking off mic earlier that Daniel's in a feisty mood today, and he is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's this notion of you talked about sort of the left people who are burned all down, and then you have people in the that Elon kind of cult like mentality where they're sort of like, all right, well, the world is, and they could be on there, I guess, right or left. Like the world's so screwed, we just need to like abandon this earth, and we're going to focus on colonizing, which is equally asinine, right? It's equally doomsday, right? I think that's kind of what you're getting at, right? Is these two sides of that
Yeah, I got no issue with calling all of that doomsday cultish. So I'm
yeah,
okay with
Sure.
that, whether it's left or right. I'm fine with
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So I'm totally cool with that. I mean, the other thing that kind of strikes me is like I hadn't really thought about until we were talking about now, but this idea of dissent as a learned skill, that kind of inspires me a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe that is the case. Maybe we can learn to dissent,
I
you know,
think we
and
call
maybe
that
somebody like
something
this
very
applies this. Yeah.
yeah, sorry to interrupt
No, go
here.
ahead, please.
But I think, from a Chinese medicine or East Asian medicine perspective, we have a word for that, right? We call that zhi.
Yep. It
Yep,
takes some
we call
will.
that zhi. It takes will, right? And
Sure means will because no one speaks Chinese. So yeah.
yeah.
Oh, Daniel was,
So,
I mean, Ryan was explaining it too, though.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 yeah. So we got to, we have to do, that's, and the more you do those things, whether you do
Correct.
a meditation retreat or, whatever it happens to be, where you're testing your resolve, right? The more you test your resolve, it's like any muscle, right? You're able to build it up. Right?
Yeah.
So
That's
absolutely.
I
Yeah, I
mean,
mean it's exercise, it's any kind of discipline,
Yep.
anything that you do repeatedly, and especially when it's hard. That's when those muscles or those grooves in your brain, if you will, become the strongest because you tell yourself, I can do this. Oh, I've done it when it's hard. So of course I can do it now. Even if this task is insurmountable, you build that confidence in yourself to say like, oh yeah, no, I've done this thing. Or yeah, no, I stand up for what I believe in. Or no, I stand up for what I believe to be right. Even if you don't agree with me, like on what we're saying, and we're not being overly political at this point, we're not generally because we're talking about principal states of being and understanding and existing. It's like, okay, if you believe in something wholeheartedly, then do it. But if you don't, then why are you standing behind it? That's always that's I mean, we always boil it down, but that's where it ends up. That's where the conversation ends up going.
Well, I mean, like the will thing in Chinese medicine has to do with like the kidney. If we do a little TCM talk, right?
Mm.
Right.
The idea is when the kidney system is stronger, you can show more of this will, which can be perseverance. But in a
Yes.
funny way, the vulnerability of that system, we tie this under this idea of the water phase in Chinese medicine, is like fear.
Hmm.
So I mean, what's happening with this has been a kind of recurring theme for us too, obviously, but it takes the will to be able to dissent, and the thing that's going to stop you is you're afraid. So you need the will to overcome the fear, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
as
A lot
far
of
as like,
people,
oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah. So this brings us back to the other part of the study. It's like the majority of the people are sort of or have a tendency to acquiesce, right, in a social
Yes.
situation, right? And so why do people want social cohesion and solidarity? Well, they want that stability. What they want that social harmony. They're looking out for themselves and their family, right? And so there's this protection mentality, right? And so they're willing to sort of look the other way when, to Daniel's point, they see something that's wrong, right? And we have numerous examples of this in history of large communities looking the other way when they knew something was wrong, right? They acquiesced, right? And so there is this process, which I know you guys have talked about extensively, of you have to cultivate, right? You have to cultivate your will, right? And your true sense of self, right? And that's not easy. Sometimes, when we're talking, when all of us are talking, we talk about it as sort of like it's just what everybody does. It just happens to be something that all of us value and we consider very important, but it's hard work to do that. It's not easy to go against society. Society doesn't want you to do that.
Well, even like as far as the doomsday cult thing, I was thinking about this earlier. You brought it up, Ryan. I mean, the real dissent is when you disagree with the cult that you're a part of. It's not like a
Correct.
thing to disagree with
Correct.
the other people. That's not
Right,
the issue.
right.
Can I look at like what's happening within my own in group, right?
Yeah.
And say, whatever it is, and we can all come up with examples recently. I won't do it. But you start saying, no, that's wrong within my in group. Then you're showing dissent.
Right.
Right.
And that's more
Then you're showing
powerful.
will.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
always more powerful. It's more powerful when, a Democratic person criticizes the Democratic Party. It's more powerful when a Republican person, speaks out against the Republican Party. That is how that works, because you believe them more because they're coming from, you believe them to be coming from the inside, you believe them to hold more views that are similar to that. And now here someone is like, yes, I agree with you with on the majority of things, we're on the same team, but on these points, I don't agree with you actually. And I'm going to be willing to come out and put my name to my words and say, no, I don't believe that, or I think that's bullshit, or, whatever the case is. So it takes more courage, because you are not affiliated with, we'll be binary here. You're not affiliated with the other side, right? In any intense and purpose, but you're leaving yourself on an island to be marooned, right? So from a evolutionary psychological perspective, this would be very dangerous, because if you're going to criticize your own tribe, well, your tribe might not like that, and your
Yeah.
tribe might kick you out. And now where? You're definitely not a member of the tribe down the road. They don't like you. You know what I mean? They're ready to eat your lungs. You know what I'm saying? And your heart or whatever. But it's a dangerous thing. It feels like you're on a limb by your own, and this is a place that most people get very scared, right? And so then we go back to that thing between will and fear. And
Yeah.
if the fear is up, then willpower is going to be down. My yoga teacher and many East Asian philosophies discuss this, and I quite love it. It said when your wants, or when your need, I can't remember it. Son of a bitch, I had it in my head. When your willingness to say no to your wants is greater than your desire to say yes, you are building your willpower. And so for people who are, looking for some kind of tangible, for people who are listening to this are looking for some tangible things to take away from that, that's what that starts with. And we talked about that from the very beginning. That's discipline. You know, that's not it's not the way for every single thing, but if you could say no to things that you don't need more often than the yes to things that you think you do, well, then you're going to start to cultivate yourself in a way that you're going to, move down a path that you're choosing as opposed to being chosen for you.
Yeah, I'm also like, again, I can't stop thinking about because we're talking about, I'm really attracted to this idea that this is a learned skill. And it has something to do with
Yeah.
freedom too, probably, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if I'm willing to like resist and be a free person and say what I know is true in this situation, obviously what's at stake is like, am I going to call something tr what it is, or am I going to pretend like I'm dumber than what I am,
Mm-hmm.
essentially, right?
It's an
Mm-hmm.
interesting,
No.
you both bring up really interesting ideas here, which I think we talked a little bit about last week, which is there is dissent and there's an internal dissent and then there's external dissent. So
Sure.
I think it becomes more problematic when you lose that internal dissent. There's some situations where like you're going to dissent, and like your whole family may throw acid on you, and you're going to die or you get burned alive or stoned alive. In some countries, and like that's probably not the right move because then you become very spiritual because you'll be all spirit and you'll be dead, right? Right. I mean
Nice.
that's what happens. So there is a little bit of understanding that kind of context here is like some people are not in a position to externally dissent, and so they must internally dissent, and until they have the freedom, as Eric put it, to actually express their opinions without being killed.
But like for those of us here,
Yeah.
it's really like it's the stakes aren't as high.
No. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just more of a question of like, are you willing to do this? And I'm struck by the idea that, maybe you can learn how to do it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. The other two
Yeah.
studies I had real quick, I'll get your all's opinion on them, is it also had something to, I mean, when you extrapolate this out, it has something to do with intelligence then too. Even a study like this, like you're willing to like misidentify a color, you're being dumber than what you are, right? Saying
Mhm.
that before. The other studies around this that I thought were really interesting were ones where you would give people tasks to like sort of accomplish, right? And they give examples of like, um, anagrams that you had to figure out or other kinds of learning tasks.
Right.
And what they showed was when you had people doing it in alternative ways, when you had people dissenting even in the ways that they were approaching the problems, even if they weren't the best ones, you know, people saw this. So someone else is doing this in some other way. They got more creative in their own problem solving, and they got kind of more intelligent in their problem solving. And that struck me too in this, this correlation, this interconnection between like dissent and creativity, and in a certain sense, in dissent and like clear understanding or like something that's almost like intelligence, right? When you see people like doing things differently and challenging, uh, you know, conventional ways of doing things, then all of a sudden, in a certain sense, the spirits, the intelligence of the person, the spirit can shine stronger, and the person gets more creative and more intelligent. And I don't know if I'd thought about that. Obviously, I thought about that question in different ways, but it's in the social psych research, right? That this happens. People get more creative and, in a certain sense, more intelligent. So I don't know. What do you all think about that? I find that very psychospiritually interesting, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it makes me think almost as the juxtaposition to that of what does it take to be in a cult, right? Um, you're following in most cases a charismatic leader, right? And you are taught in that situation not to question, to follow, right? So it is a dumbing down process. Um, you're just listening and following. Whereas when you're dissenting in this creative act, yeah, that requires critical thought, and intelligence. Um, and once you do that, you're just going to continue on doing that, hopefully.
And the worst verse would be like when you are participating in those things, in a certain sense, you're giving up creativity and you're giving up intelligence, right?
Yeah. Right.
I'm also trying to like really into the idea in these episodes about like it's partially a charismatic leader and it's partially like an ideology too.
Hmm.
Well, don't for I mean, yes, but you can't forget the power of the group, you know? The
Yep.
power of the I agrees, the power of being recognized, the power of having your fucking weak ass ego pumped up by people who are just as dumb as you are. You know what I mean? And like you're gonna be the smart one of the idiots. You know what I'm saying? Like I just see lots of this, people making like nuanced arguments over nothing, and then yeah, particularly, whatever. I don't even want to call it social media. It's not media, whatever it is, dribble, you know what I mean? Like a public journal of, mental vomiting. But like, people, oh wow, oh wow, it's really, really small. Oh, of course, you always have the good thoughts. You know what I'm saying? Like you're looking for accolades, but you're looking for accolades from people who think just like you. So like you're not even really challenging yourself to have like a substantive conversation in general. It's all, it's one volley. I don't know. I don't find it to be very helpful,
Yeah, it's
and so
acceptance and comfort, right?
of
It's like,
course.
yeah, it's so you are now part of this group. You are accepted by the group, and that's comfortable, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think I would find it more, genuine if people just said that,
Mhm.
you know? These people, I feel alone in society, and these people, even though I don't know them, I can show up at a rally or I can show up at a protest, you know, and find comfort knowing that we are passionate about the same thing. And like we're bred to be social creatures. Like I don't think there's some like that inherently in and of itself is not a wrong thing, you know? And that's part of part of our social psychological, expose that we're doing here on cults. It's like you could just show up and now you're all part of the same thing and that feels good, because you're not alone. Because essentially people are just scared of dying, you know, and scared of being a blip in the infinite sands of time and no one will remember them and they won't be part of anything. I mean, I felt when I was when I was active duty, like I really enjoyed wearing the uniform and I enjoyed making the same sounds as everybody else around me. Like that's a very powerful thing. It's hard to put that down, for sure. Just like playing sports or any team thing, even if it's a team of chess players like your son, Eric, you know?
That's is very solo. You're out on an island.
Right, but
You
I mean, if
know?
him and
Yeah.
his buddies have matching chest jackets on, they're the Raiders or some cool chess guys, whatever. They could be called the Chesticles. That's also
Just
possible, but you feel camaraderie and camaraderie feels good because you're not alone,
Yep.
right? And alone isolation and fear and we talked about this, the kidney, the kind of water element in TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, those are all related. It's all part of the same thing. So if you're going to not intentionally build up the willpower that is going to take to dissent and call bullshit where bullshit is, then you're fighting against something that is a that we have as a deep tendency, I think, latent within us, whether it's a vulnerability or a tendency. We're scared of isolation. We're scared of being obliterated. And so, at least during my time here, if I'm going to be passionate about something and there's other people who believe the same thing that I do, then I'm going to go ahead and fall in line with that because that feels better to me than being out on a limb on my own. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it reduces social anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you have like being alone, right? And
Yes.
that's comforting, right? So I guess maybe my question, thinking about this to you is sort of, so what is the answer from like a Buddhist Taoist, spiritual seeker perspective? When we look at sort of what these traditions suggest, or some of these spiritual paths, what they suggest, when confronting, this cult-like mentality.
Well, I guess it's like what really strikes me about the social science stuff entwined with this, because I maybe like in my experience, I was studying psychology and then I went into things like Zen, and it probably was building up for me to some critical mass, right? And I was realizing, like, say, I was exposed to these kinds of studies back when I was like in my 20s, when I was making these like transitions, and I was like, well, wait a minute. If I actually can go through and resist things, well, then maybe I'll get more creative. Maybe I'll get more free. Maybe I'll get whatever. And I think that like struck me as being like quintessentially important, you know? Um, Now, if you want to get to like a specific kind, and I was drawn to these, I guess I know how it was for you to, but I was really drawn to the ones that were feisty, the ones that were saying like, no, I'm not going to comply. Real minor tangent on this, Ryan. You asked the question, it's a deep one, but you and I both had a maybe different experience with Daniel in some ways where I was like sick when I was a teenager. And these
Yeah.
times when I was supposed to be socialized, I really wasn't. I wasn't like Tarzan the Wolf Boy out in some like wild thing that had to be socialized again.
Yeah.
But like I wasn't out and about. I was like a very isolated solo person. And I don't know how you feel about that, but there's something about maybe developing a certain contrarian personality when you don't fully socialize in that way. Do you feel
Yeah.
those kind of things?
Yeah, I mean, we both kind of shared that similarity where I was very, very sick, during my certainly during my teenage years, like deathly ill, right? And so, I wasn't exposed to, like, as you mentioned, a lot of that, and it made me um, reflect upon my the very nature of my life and I guess reality at a very young age, um, and probably change the trajectory of my life. I probably had a predisposition to do that anyways, but that forced the issue.
Yeah, I think Ryan, your question,
Yeah.
so people want to be around other people. That's part of it, right? In Buddhist philosophy, there's the three jewels, which are we call them like the Buddha, which is the
Yeah.
could be your teacher, the actual Buddha, could be your enlightened aspect of yourself, the soul, if you will, the Shen. And that's one jewel. The other jewel, I don't know what kind of jewels they are, but we're gonna call them all rubies for this purpose of this conversation. The second one they call it the Dharma. Dharma could be taught as it could be discussed as reality, the reality that we're here, or the actual reality that's beyond this reality, or the teachings that come from your teacher, that come from the Buddha, that come from your soul, if you will. And then the last one is the Sangha, and the Sangha is generally referred to as a community or spiritual community, but you could also see it as experiences, shared with other people and whatever. So you need those things. You have to acknowledge your soul, have some kind of ways of learning, and then some of those learnings happen with other beings. Okay, well, what brings those beings together is is my answer to your question. So from this kind of perspective, what is one's organizing principle, or maybe we use more contemporary language, your moral compass, if you will, right?
Yep.
And if you are not intentional about finding beings who share the same aspirations, the same kind of moral compass, or at least are working on that, then you are going to be in Sangha or in groups or community of a collection of people, which is fine, but that are you're organized around different things. And while you may agree on some things, you're probably not going to agree on many other things. But if the thing that is bringing you to gather with these folks, whether it be virtual or in person or whatever, is anger, well, then that's your organizing principle. It's anger. And that could be, again, on one side, we could say that's a rally. On the other side, we could say it's a protest. And, you can guess which side does which one. They do both, right? Both happens on both ways, but it doesn't matter. The organizing principle is anger. Now, is there justified anger in the world? Sure. Of course there is. Am I sitting here saying what is justified and what is not? No, because that's up to somebody else to decide. But if you're getting together with people to get together with people to influence other people's negative outcomes on their life, well, then that's you're making somebody else's life worse. That's your organizing principle. You're an asshole. You know what I mean? And everybody else who you're hanging out with, they're fucking assholes too. You know what I mean? Like that's what that looks like. And so I think you have to kind of like go to the root level of where you're at and why you're getting together with people, and then think: are these the kind of people that I want to actually get together with? What are we going to discuss? Of course, you can meet some, a couple nice people randomly at a protest or a rally, of course, because you're going to have some things in common. But when you get down to the deeper levels of your like philosophy and psychology, have you even done the deep dive to see what that really is? And do you share those kind of like deeper moral compasses with these people? If you think one way is north and they think it's west, y'all ain't aligning. You're here for a moment, but you're not here for life. That's for sure.
It does sort of argue that, like, if there's a certain part of this that's true, especially if you're just sort of finding your identity, you should really make a point of like being with the people who more fit into what your ideals might be. I mean, it does argue to that, right, Daniel?
Hmm.
Part of what you're saying. I had to be
Hmm.
around people where my goals might initially be fragile. I can remember these feelings when I first started studying Zen. It's difficult, but you're around other people who at least hold that same value.
Yes.
People may not appreciate what you're doing. My family didn't. Like, what kind
Yeah.
of fucking psycho shit are you doing? And I had to be like, okay, I have to resist that. I had to dissent from that group, right? But I also had, in the beginning parts, especially when I was feeling more fragile in what I would be doing, I had, other people who would be the Sangha who would support me in that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there is this notion of being around a group, right, of people who are, I mean, it's interesting because, almost the way you're phrasing it, almost it's like you want to be around people, I would say, who are also critical thinking, who are willing to challenge you. Because
Hmm.
you don't want to be around people who are just going to like acquiesce to whatever you say. That's like another cult, right? So just to differentiate that,
They,
right?
they expect you to acquiesce back,
Right.
right?
You don't want
Yeah,
that.
you have to be
Like, that's not the
reciprocal
type of
to
community you want.
acquiescing. Yeah.
And when I asked the question, I guess I was thinking of similarities, with some of these traditions that, whether it's a Taoist perspective or certain Buddhist perspectives or like a shamanic perspective or whatever you want to call it, it requires a certain amount of individual cultivation and also a rejection of social norms to a certain degree. Like you have to like you're like, hey, you have to ask yourself, do I fit into this? So for me, when I was like, do I fit into this picture of this, this person who's going to have like a white picket fence, two kids, a wife, or whatever, and do this 9 to 5 job. It's like, no, that wasn't me. Like, didn't feel right. Like I kind of at a basic level sort of rejected that, you know, um, in myself. I'm not saying those things are inherently bad, but when you make that leap into self internal cultivation, it requires, I would say, a separation from society to a certain degree. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, that's like every episode of this podcast.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Just
But
want to
I
clarify
think we
that.
do agree on that because I think it's a precondition almost or
Yeah,
something.
I think you have to do it. I
Yeah.
logically can't think of how you can do it otherwise. I'm open to being wrong. I haven't been able to figure anything out. Like, can you go along and do what everyone else is doing and be part of society and like somehow become enlightened? No, I don't think so. I don't see how it's possible.
I don't know if it is either. I mean, like, I was going to throw one other thing about to what that I'll just throw it out because it's striking to me how often, again, like I'm going a little bit either Zen or Buddhist Tantra, the things that I've been interested in, but they have this thing called the Eight Mundane Concerns. I had some special teachings on it, and it does get to the what you're talking about. And what's interesting about it is it has to be like, again, maybe it implies that this is learned, which maybe I hadn't thought about that enough. But they basically say you have to learn how to resist this fear of good opinion versus bad opinion.
Mhm.
And that fits into even what you and Daniel have been emphasizing sort of about the Evo psych thing. It means you're risking the bad opinion of the people within the in group that
Yeah,
you're relying on to overcome these fears of isolation.
yeah,
I mean, even in a certain Buddhist sense, that would have to be risking the bad opinion of the people within your own Sangha, because those are the people you're relying on,
right.
Mm.
right? So you have to risk their bad opinion too, if you really don't agree with it, right?
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
they say you have to learn how to resist good opinion versus bad opinion. And then they kind of stretch it out. Praise versus criticism. You have to be willing to take criticism and not just do things out of this sort of way of trying to gather praise. You
Yeah,
have to risk criticism, right?
yeah,
You're going to have to dissent. And then they get a little bit more like gain versus loss is kind of another way of looking at this, right? You can't be afraid of like losing the things that you may lose when you're kind of seeking sort of more your own truth, right? You have to be willing to like risk loss, right? And then eventually in the end, they say pleasure and pain. You can't be totally just driven by, I think you've all been kind of emphasizing this idea of comfort
Mhm.
and security is a kind of a pleasure, right?
Absolutely.
And it feels painful to lose those things. But in this Eight Mundane Concerns, I got it from one of the tantric teachers I studied with, you know, that, and it's a classic teaching, right? It's like you have to be willing to risk those things, right? But right at the core, is the good opinion versus bad opinion, praise versus criticism. Those things are scary, right, on some level. Anyways, that's a set of tools. maybe at the end of an episode to think, okay, it gives you a chance to screen your own life and go, okay, we all struggle with these things. Obviously, none of us are going to be perfect with this or something. But if you get to the part of tools to look at, you can start saying, well, am I just doing this because I'm afraid of like bad opinion? Am I just doing this because I'm afraid of criticism? Am I just doing this because I have fears of loss or I have fears of, losing the pleasures that I have that maybe aren't really richly rewarding? Maybe they're just comforts and securities that ultimately aren't really taking me anywhere. That's the eight mundane concerns. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a toolkit for that.
There's a shortcut, Eric.
Yeah.
You just have to understand. You just have to have the wisdom of impermanence, free you from the shekels of constant, you know what I'm saying, views of reality as an unchanging thing. And of course, uh, absorbing the wisdom of emptiness will just help all of this. And understanding interconnectivity, boom, you're done. That's it. I mean,
I
easy.
don't even know if that's true if you can't actually deal with this shit. I mean, that's interesting. It goes back to what Ryan was talking about too. Some people will mouth like, oh yeah, impermanence. Oh yeah, whatever. But they never face this shit.
Well, and some of
What
it.
it means to risk other people like not thinking good of you or giving you shit.
So okay, so all right,
That's a different thing almost,
so I heard. So I was listening to something the other day, and I thought it was very interesting. He said that people who shame you in like public shaming, that person, if you're doing your practice well, you should have gratitude for them because they are a teacher of yours. Well, why is that the case? What do teachers do? Amongst many other things, what do teachers do? They help you to see aspects of yourself that you were unaware of. And so the shame that you are feeling is the arising of your own self as a independent entity, as a being that has a reputation. You're aware that you're viewed in public a certain way. And this person here is slandering you, and nothing that you can do is going to unslander all of this. But is that actually who you are? If that thing is real or false, no, it's not. That's not who you are. So they are giving you aspects of yourself of how you are being perceived that were unaware of before. So now you have that information. It's kind of a mind fuck in a sense, but I think that it's useful to see that because if not, then we're dealing with we're constantly dealing with those mundane concerns, as you talked about. But the deeper part that cannot be that is very difficult to move into real life. And by this point in the podcast, if you're still with us, good for you. You know what I mean? You got the top 3% of whatever. But we're gonna just dive for the next, probably 5 minutes here beyond the level of most people's awarenesses, even my own. So, good luck for me. But like if your practice is yielding you results, whatever you're practicing, even if you're practicing fucking lifting weights, you know, they're like eventually reality around you does become a place of experimentation. You know, when you see something outside of you, where does that image get brought into your mind? Where are you interpreting it? It's in your brain, but where in your brain? You can't touch it. You don't know exactly where it is. And then when you close your eyes, is it still there? And not here, but I mean, it's still in your mind. Where in your mind is it? You just saw it. Well, what if the image is bigger than your whole body? Your brain is, you have to like wrestle with ideas about like where mind is and how mind operates. You know what I'm saying? Similarly, if you're exercising and you become stronger, things in your life become lighter. Your will becomes stronger because you're used to telling yourself, I can do this thing. I can lift 200. I can 300, 400 pounds. I can do that. All of a sudden, you feel stronger because of your ability to do different things. So your life changes as your practice changes. And so from my perspective, I thoroughly enjoy challenging my relative view of reality with we can call it idealistic philosophical teachings from East Asian traditions, because they're always kind of poking at the structures that I keep in my mind of myself, of my reality, of everything else. And they always end up going back. Again, they're coming from the same place of teaching, but they always end up going back to like the very same principles, of emptiness, interconnectivity, impermanence. And impermanence, the other day when I was listening to something, he said things are always becoming something else. And I like to think that we call that evolution. And if I can be involved in my own evolutionary process, well, then I get to have a hand in a process that's already happening. I get to move that level of my unawareness to my level of awareness. And now I get to be an active participant. It gives me at least the illusion of control a little bit, which it is an illusion, but it is a thing. And so if I look at that in terms of my relationships, right? Because society is just an infinite connection of relationships. I can have some influence as to where I go with the people around me. And it doesn't mean that I can't have long-term friendships, but depending on who I want in my life now, moving forward, the people who are going to help to support me and me, them in their life, well, then I have to be an active participant. And that means I'm going to have to challenge some relationship structures, like we talked about for so long with all the various, polyamory dynamics and whatever else. I have to challenge all those things to see who's there with me at the end, because now they're going to be able to accept me and all of my dichotomies, which there are many. And if the group that I am in is not able to accept that, like, I'm more conservative about some things and more liberal about others, and I'm more of a bro on one thing, and I'm more sensitive, which some people might consider effeminate on something else, you're going to have to hold space for all of those if you're going to be around me, because I'm willing to do that for you. And I think that when we get around people who we, are gathering with because of anger or because of malcontent or because of whatever is going to bring us together, I don't think that those kind of conversations are happening, A. And B, I don't think that they're able to really do that for each other because they're not even having substantive discussions outside of, modern concerns and political discourse, only just to sow disruption amongst their, opposing sides. You know what I'm saying? So, in summary, the ways in which that you interact with people and the intention that you go into those discussions and those relationships, right? Even if it's just for a day, you have to be very mindful about, because if not, then you'll find yourself with people dressed looking just like you, doing terrible things, and you will be there to witness it and possibly even participate.
Daniel, you bring up like some really important points, which I would categorize under like cultivation, right? Cultivation of self. And so, the reasons why you meditate, why you have a regimen, why you have discipline, as you talked about, is to kind of build this will or this jure. Um, because without it, it's really hard to achieve anything. And it also is hard to achieve like a self-awareness, because this is what you're trying to get at. You're trying to figure out, and I don't know if you and I have talked about it, Daniel, but Erica and I have talked about this sort of, this notion of explicating, taking layer by layer off of
Hmm.
yourself, like these social layers of what society sort of try to shape you in, to kind of get to the real person, right? And
Mm.
that is hard work. It is, basically you're taking a surgical scalpel and you're kind of peeling back these layers of like who you really are. Like, is this true? Is this true? No, that's not true. Like, where am I getting caught? Where am I being pressured? Like, all of these things you have to be conscious of, because society doesn't, and I'm being kind of critical of society here, is like, doesn't really want you to be you, right? Quite the opposite, right? Quite the opposite.
Last words, Eric?
Yeah, maybe like the last thing I would say is there's a kind of a Zen aspect of this too, kind of building on what both you were talking about, which is like on the one hand, you could be peeling away layers, right? Some of this might have to do the things we're talking about. What am I afraid of? Am I afraid of good opinion or bad opinion, praise and criticism, and all these things? The other part is maybe having kind of a trust that the more true nature of who you are will kind of like explode outward from the inside. So you can think of it like, okay, I'm peeling away these things where I have fears and doubts and these kinds of things. Or like what you were talking about, Ryan, a lot in our conversations, as well as, we talk about this a lot, but this idea of like inauthenticities, I'm going to peel these things away, these things that feel artificial. But on the other hand, I can have a trust that my own spirit, my own, if you want to use the word Buddha nature, my own Shen, if you want to be Chinese about it, whatever it is, will kind of explode outward from the inside too if I give it the chance to feed it. It wants to grow and develop as well. And I mean, that's just another side of the experience I thought I would throw out there. But yeah,
Yeah.
thank you all. Deep. Hmm.
Yeah, very much so. Ryan, thanks for coming on. Eric,
Thank you so much.
Always happy to be here.
Yeah, yeah. And audience, thank you for listening or for watching, however you're consuming this. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, smash that subscribe button. Or you can email us at ginandtantra@gmail.com. Hit us up on the gram, the Gin and Tantra podcast, or if you see our names, you can holler at us on Facebook or whatever the case is. The discussion is ongoing. We're always trying to give our own personal perspective and teachings from wherever we get them from, presenting different studies and things from social psychology and regular psychology and maybe even some abnormal psychology. You know what I mean? Like that's just how it goes.
The whole
So
thing is abnormal psychology to make
basically,
things make
really,
sense.
truly
Yeah.
is. For Ryan and Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.